Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, Icsan, is now at your doorstep.
By the way, what is corporate governance and what are its key pillars?
Will there be any conflict of interest if a person combines the roles of a chairman and a chief executive officer in a corporate organization?
What can Nigeria do to gain international recognition in the context of the application of corporate governance?
These and many more questions will be answered on
Corporate Governance Platform, a program designed to inform and educate our numerous viewers on the adoption of corporate governance best practices by corporate entities.
Join the Corporate Governance Platform crew every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. on MITV, your talent station via DSTV 255 and UHF 43.
Corporate Governance Platform, your strategy for the adoption of corporate governance best practices by corporate entities. Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, Icsan, the hub of governance professionals.
It's a Thursday evening. Thanks for joining us on Corporate Governance Platform. I am Tunde Odeyemi, your anchorman. And in today's episode, we shall be taking a look at the role of executive directors as managers of corporate business. And joining me and leading in the conversation this evening is Mr. Francis Olawale. Mr. Francis Olawale is a member of the Governing Council and the current Honorary Treasurer of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria. He is an accountant by primary training, a governance and compliance practitioner, and also a chartered secretary. He is the principal partner of Frank's Nominees, a secretarial governance and business support firm, and the founding partner of Frank's Management Consulting International, a training financial advisory and process engineering firm. Mr. Olawale is an IFC certified board evaluator and ISO 9000-2015 certified accountant. Mr. Francis Olawale, you are welcome to the show.
Thank you, it's my pleasure. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, viewers.
And thank you for finding time to join us on this program.
My pleasure once again.
Okay, Mr. Olawale, let's hit the ground running. Who are the executive directors of corporate business?
Okay, executive directors of corporate business are operational leaders. They are operational directors. They are directors who have employee-employer relationship with the company. And basically what they do is to support the MD CEO in achievement of the strategic imperatives of the company as set and as mandated on the board.
Okay, now what distinguishes the executive directors from the non-executive director and vice versa in the same company?
Okay, like I said, earlier on, executive directors are operational leaders. The influence of that is the fact that they have daily deliverables. They resume 9 to 5, so to say,
okay.
So they are employees, of the organization. While the non-executive directors, are just directors who are part of governance process, who are part of decision making, and then they function, by coming around to the board only when the board sits, and then of course as required, as other duties assigned, to them, but they are not employees, of the company. And then the kind of engagements, documents given to them. The non-executive directors, are saying in section 2.4, of the NCCG code,
okay.
Are issued letters of appointments, while the executive directors, are issued contracts of employment.
Okay.
And basically the type of relationship that exists, that's another, distinguishing factor. The kind of relationship that exists between the company and then each of them. For example, the non-executive directors, they have a contract for service with the company. In other words, that's a contract between a service provider and the client. while the executive directors have contract of service. That's like a contract between, in quotes, master and servant. That's employer and employee.
Do they really perform the same function in the company?
Okay, well, some executive directors are part of board, but not all executive directors are part of board.
Okay.
In many instances, most times at least, it's a given. The MD CEO, who himself, if you're supposed to classify him by the species of director that he is an executive director. The MD CEO is a given, is a member of the board. Many times, the ED finance, the CFO, usually, for obvious reason, always a part of the board. And then any other, director has deemed fit, by the board. But the idea is that because of the global practice requirements, that requires non-executives to be much more than executives on board. So most times companies don't want to have large numbers, of executives, because you will have to outnumber them, by the number of non-executives you're bringing, on board. Going back to your questions, the roles that they play, is that they have daily deliverables, functional roles. You have ED finance, you have ED corporate services and all of that. The functional areas, of the business. Most times, these EDs are the operational leaders, of these functional areas.
You mentioned the NCCG code, the National Code for Corporate Governance, right?
Yes.
So now the code provides that the executive directors should have broad understanding of the company's business. That is in addition to possessing such other qualifications as may be needed for their specific assignments or responsibilities. Now, why would you say this is really important?
Yeah, that's important because every organization, like I was saying earlier, there are cardinal areas, there are cardinal functional areas of an organization. I'm talking about, finance, I'm talking about operations, I'm talking about, HR, talking about personnel and marketing. You realize that, for every organization, all other three areas apart from operations are service areas, but operation is the core area of any entity. And as such, you need competent hands. You need a duty of skill and care, to man it, because that is the soul of the business. So you need people who have understanding, of that business. Before the NCCG, it's usually advisable, most codes, most sectional codes say, okay, the EDs, so the NEDs should be more than the EDs. You realize that NICOM, the insurance industry, particularly stated that they wanted a minimum of 40% of EDs on board. Why? Because of the peculiarity of their business. I could have acumen, as a businessman, understand, decision-making process, but I don't have the technical know-how of a particular business, area. And that is the life wire, to achieving the strategic imperatives that have been set by the boss. So that's the reason why, the code requires that EDs, should be competent. In other words, what the code is saying is that there should be people, of expertise. There should be people of competence, because the nature of their duty majorly is that of skill and care.
Okay, still talking about the code. Why do you think the code allows now executive directors to take appointments as non-executive directors in other companies when it's not, of course, detrimental to their responsibility? Why do you think the code allows that?
Well, for obvious reasons. Of course, CAMA, of course, I'm sure you're aware, that the Company and Allied Matters Act 2020, has just been gazetted, just last month. CAMA did not differentiate in its definition of director. It simply defines, a director as anyone who is so appointed by the company to manage, and control the business of the company. So it does not really differentiate. But for governance, purpose, you realize that, the EDs that have executive role is a different ballgame, from having executive and operational, functions, and then functioning on the board. So a board, may want to expose an ED, to governance. An ED who is a future leader, is a future board, product of the company. They may want to expose him, so that he sees, what decision making, what governance is about, generally. And then, of course, like I said, another reason, may be, the fact that it is in line with the succession plan arrangement of the company. And then succession plan works in two ways. You're trying to refresh, basically the board, either that or you're trying to build new leaders, to fill in identified positions. So if a particular person has been spotted to be a future, board material, the board could want to expose him, so that when the time comes, for him, to migrate into the board, you already have some exposures, as far as governance is concerned.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
When the code says as long as it is not detrimental to their responsibilities, what really came to mind is, can an executive director become a non-executive director in the same industry?
Well, in the same industry, to competitors. I mean, if you want to become an NED to your competitor, that definitely, at that point in time, conflict of interest will arise. So I'm not going to say, yes. But could an executive director be nurtured into becoming, a future non-executive director in that particular company? Nothing kicks against that, in the code. But what the code kicks against is that an executive, the code says that it is not desirable for an executive director in the same company or the MD CEO in the same company to become the chairman, of the board. And then the board provides that in an unlikely situation, in an extreme situation, if it is unavoidable, there should be a cooling off, period for obvious reasons.
We are still discussing the role of executive directors as managers of corporate business. We quickly go on a short break. When we come back, we continue the discussion with Mr. Francis Olawale. Please don't go away.
Corporate Governance Platform, a program from the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, Icsan, is now at your doorstep.
By the way, what is corporate governance and what are its key pillars?
Will there be any conflict of interest if a person combines the roles of a chairman and a chief executive officer in a corporate organization?
What can Nigeria do to gain international recognition in the context of the application of corporate governance?
These and many more questions will be answered on
Corporate Governance Platform, a program designed to inform and educate our numerous viewers on the adoption of corporate governance best practices by corporate entities.
Join the Corporate Governance Platform coup every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. on MITV, your talent station via DSTV 255 and UHF 43.
Corporate Governance Platform, your strategy for the adoption of corporate governance best practices by corporate entities. Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, Icsan, the hub of governance professionals.
You're welcome back. We are still discussing the role of executive directors as managers of corporate business, live in MITV. And I still have Mr. Francis Olawale with me. Now, Mr. Olawale, what is the rationale behind the behind the provision of the code that an executive director should not be a member of the committees responsible for remuneration, audit, or nomination and governance?
Okay, because of the sensitive, nature of the role those committees play. By NCCG, there are 4 basic, committees. In addition to those 3 that you mentioned, the risk, the risk management, committee. Okay, now if you check respectively, principle 11.12, 11.22, 11.43. Dealing with the composition of remuneration, nomination, and audit, committee. It specifically, states that only NEDs should be members of those committees, and even goes further to say, that there should be more INEDs. INEDs are directors of a higher degree of objectivity, just to show you, the level of objectivity required, for those functions, and that's because of the sensitive role, that they play. Now, let's paint a picture. The remuneration, committee decides remuneration. So why should, an ED who is a full-time employer, in quotes, of the company, be involved in setting his own remuneration? There will be high level, of bias. Then for audit committee, for obvious, reason, even though the liability, for the financial statements is on the board, we know that it's the operators, that basically prepares, even though the liability is on the board. So the executive directors, play a prime role in preparing it. So they cannot also be supervising, the audit committee basically interfaces, with the external auditor, they manage the relationship. So the executive directors cannot be in charge of that relationship, being key players in the preparation, of those financial statements on behalf of the board. And then for nomination, committee, one of the key roles, of the nomination committee is, annual evaluation of independent non-executive directors. And then the nomination committee as well is in charge, of headhunting, appointments, on the board. And the non-executive directors, on board basically are expected to bring independent judgment, and they're supposed to serve as checks and balances, to the EDs. If the EDs are part of, that committee, you realize that water would have mixed, with oil, and there won't be objectivity, and as such, there won't be, achievement of the strategic imperative, expected, of the executives to achieve on behalf of the board.
Okay, I'll now say the reason for that. Now, but why is the code specific that executive directors declare conflict of interest on appointments and annually also declare conflict of interest where they see potential areas of conflict of interest?
Yes, of course, yes. It states that, and then, the third part, the closing part of that particular provision also says, the activities that follow the discovery of the conflict of interest should be in line with the conflict of interest policy, of the company, for obvious reasons. They are the ones who on behalf of the board and of course, by default on behalf, of the shareholders as well. They are the ones that watch over the cookie jar, so to say, on a daily basis. So if they can make, financial gains or what has the semblance, of gains by virtue of that privileged, position that they hold, then it's imperative for them, to declare it in the spirit of transparency. For example, they will be in charge of strategic, intelligence information just by virtue of the role that they play. So it's important to then check them, so that they are not unchecked. So if there's anything that has the semblance, of them taking advantage, or making private gains by virtue of the kind of information, the kind of, details about the company that they are exposed to, by virtue of their position, then it's important, it's imperative for them, to declare.
So what's the implication of declaring this conflict of interest?
The implication of declaring, the conflict of interest is that they would have aligned with one of the pillars of corporate governance, which is transparency, and then of course accountability, essentially, because you couldn't, for all you care, it may not, be out of, corrupt mindedness. It's just something that has semblance, of them, making any form of gains by virtue of their, position. By the time they declare, that's why I added the third aspect, of that particular provision, that in the event of them declaring, every action that will follow should be in line with the conflict of interest. The code also mandates, that every company should have, a conflict of interest, policies, where, certain parameters are set out. Take for example the issue of, insider dealing or dealing in the company's, shares. There are instances where after declaring, to the board, of course, to the chairman, there are instances where sometimes, the transactions still fly, but all guards would have been checked to ensure that you're not taking undue, financial advantage, of the company. So that's the essence of it, to checkmate them, and then in the spirit of, transparency.
Okay, still talking about the executive directors, why does the code recommend that the responsibilities and authorities of executive directors should be clearly set out in a contract of employment?
Okay. We come to this contract of employment. Again, like I said, the principle 5.6, outlines that each ED should have a contract, of employment, and then the same thing is repeated, in principle 12.6, 12.4, where it says that NED should have letters of appointment, ED should have contract, of employment. In my opinion, number one, it sets out, the basis to assess their performance. Because it is like the rule of engagement. It would have set out what is expected, of them. So that would be the basis, to appraise them or to evaluate them, when the time comes. So it will not be a question of, I don't know what I'm being, evaluated about. Then secondly, is that it serves as basis to checkmate, so that they understand the limits of their powers. They understand the limits, the length and breadth, of their powers. And then the third, in my opinion, is that it sets out the liabilities. What you don't know, the law, I don't know, ignorance is not excusing the law, like you said. So the responsibility sets out the fact that, the underlisted responsibilities of judges will be held liable, for it. And that's the reason why, as a matter of best practice, as a matter of good practice, when these contracts of employment are issued, the director signs off on it, and then he keeps a copy, and the company keeps a copy for reference, purposes. Those are some of the reasons, in my opinion, while the code sets out that the contract of employment
in order to make clear their responsibilities to the company,
for which they will be held liable for.
Now, I want us to quickly talk about the stability of tenure.
Okay.
The executive directors in an organization, is their being in the organization tenure based? Is there a number of years they should spend, or they can be in the organization for as long as they wish?
Theirs is not like the independent non-executive directors,
okay.
Which for obvious reason, for them to maintain that high level of objectivity, it's tenured, livings of 3 tenures of 3 years, each. For the executive directors, of course, for any director, be it executive or non-executive, of course, the shareholders, must stamp, so to say, must ratify. However, even though the NCCG, didn't particularly state that, but the practice is that, the non-executive director, because they are employees, first of all, and then they are experts, they are there in terms of, technical, expertise. However, their tenures, the tenures, are renewed at general meetings, of members, of shareholders. I mean, I'll give you an example. The CEO is an ED, like I told you. If you look at the CBN, Code of Corporate Governance, which will now be a guideline now, because the NCCG permits, for sectorial, guidelines. It mandates, that the ED, MD, CEO, should have, a tenure of 5 years each, subject, to a maximum of, 10 years. So that's a bit, of, a tenure. But nothing says he can't leave after 5 years. But his second tenure as started will be subject, to ratification, at general, at general meeting of shareholders. So at the expiration of any tenure, if so stated in the contract of, employment of the ED, the renewal will be done, at general meeting of members.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lawale. We can't exhaust this important topic.
I agree with you.
Definitely, we cannot exhaust the role of executive directors in business, but we are constrained with time, and this is where we'll wrap it up today. We want to thank you very much for having time to come into the program. And this is where we wrap it up on corporate governance platform for today's episode. We want to thank you very much, our audience, for giving us your time. I am Tunde Odeyemi. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Corporate Governance Platform, a program from the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, Icsan, is now at your doorstep.
By the way, what is corporate governance and what are its key pillars?
Will there be any conflict of interest if a person combines the roles of a chairman and a chief executive officer in a corporate organization?
What can Nigeria do to gain international recognition in the context of the application of corporate governance?
These and many more questions will be answered on
Corporate Governance Platform, a program designed to inform and educate our numerous viewers on the adoption of corporate governance best practices by corporate entities.
Join the Corporate Governance Platform crew every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. on MITV, your talent station, via DSTV 255 and UHF 43.
Corporate Governance Platform, your strategy for the adoption of corporate governance best practices by corporate entities. Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, Icsan, the hub of governance professionals.
Corporate Governance Platform, a program from the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, Icsan, is now at your doorstep.
By the way, what is corporate governance and what are its key pillars?
Will there be any conflict of interest if a person combines the roles of a chairman and a chief executive officer in a corporate organization?
What can Nigeria do to gain international recognition in the context of the application